The humid air of New Guinea clung to the metal skin of the P-38 Lightning, the morning sun already baking the tarmac at WWII airfield. Captain Gerald, Jerry, Johnson finished his pre-flight check, his hands moving with practiced efficiency over the familiar controls of his aircraft. Tail number 83, nicknamed Sooner. The mission briefing had been straightforward. A 4-ship combat air patrol north to Salamaua. Intercept any Japanese fighter formations, protect the Allied ground forces pushing through the Markham Valley. Routine. At 0900 hours, the 4 Lightnings thundered down the runway, their twin Allison engines roaring in unison. Johnson led the flight, his eyes constantly scanning the sky, his ears tuned to the steady, powerful drone of his own engines. Everything was nominal for the first 10 minutes. Then, his number 2's voice crackled over the radio, strained with frustration. "Sooner, this is 2. My drop tanks won't release. I'm dragging dead weight. I have to turn back," Johnson acknowledged. "Roger, 2. Return to base." The P-38 peeled away, leaving 3. 5 minutes later, another call. "Sooner, 3. Superchargers acting up on my right engine. Losing boost above 15,000. I'm a sitting duck. Aborting." Johnson's jaw tightened. "Understood, 3. Safe home." Now it was just him and his wingmen, the 4th aircraft. They climbed through a layer of broken cloud, the lush, unforgiving green of the Markham Valley unfolding beneath them. At 18,000 feet, the final transmission came. "Sooner, 4. Left engines running rough, severe vibration. Can't risk a combat engagement. I'm aborting." Silence. The radio hissed with static. Gerald Johnson was alone at 18,000 feet, his mission in tatters, his formation reduced to a single aircraft. He had a choice. The book said to turn back. Standing orders were explicit. Do not engage superior numbers alone. He looked north, toward Salamaua. He told himself he'd just go take a look. Gather intelligence. He wasn't looking for a fight. That's what he repeated to himself as he pushed the throttles forward, climbing toward 20,000 feet. At 09:47, he saw them. Movement at 10 o'clock low. Around 12,000 feet. A swarm of aircraft, wheeling and turning in a practiced, lethal bullet. He counted quickly, his blood turning to ice. 20. A mix of Nakajima Ki 43 Oscars and the newer, faster Kawasaki Ki 61 Tonys. The Oscars were nimble, deadly dancers. The Tonys, with their inline engines, were a closer match to his own Lightning. Any rational calculation screamed at him to run. To dive away, use his speed, and live to fight another day. But below those 20 enemy fighters, he knew, were Allied troops. Men dug into foxholes, advancing through jungle. Utterly vulnerable to strafing runs from the air. He was the only thing between them and a massacre. The calculation changed. His hand moved to the master arm switch. A solid, definitive click echoed in the cockpit. His right thumb rested on the trigger. 4 50 caliber machine guns and 120 mm cannon, all nose-mounted, were now live. He took a final check of his altitude, 20,000 feet, and rolled the P-38 into a diving attack. The Lightning fell out of the sky like a dropped boulder. The airspeed indicator spun 350, 400 miles per hour. The G-forces pressed him back into his seat. This was what the P-38 was built for. He picked his target, an Oscar drifting slightly on the outside of the formation. The Japanese pilot, confident in the security of his numbers, never saw the twin, boomed devil descending from above. Johnson closed the distance, 300 yards, 200, 150. He could see the red Hinomaru insignia clearly now. He pressed the trigger. The aircraft shuddered as a storm of lead and high. Explosive shells erupted from its nose. Tracers lanced through the sky, walking up the Oscar's fuselage. The 20 mm cannon shells struck with the force of sledgehammers. The Oscar's engine coughed a plume of smoke and flame, then exploded. The lightweight fighter rolled onto its back and spun, a comet of fire and metal, toward the jungle canopy below. Johnson didn't watch it crash. He pulled back on the yoke, using his diving speed to zoom, climb back to altitude. The neat Japanese formation below him erupted into chaos. Fighters scattered in every direction. Some dove, seeking the maneuverability of lower altitudes. Others pulled up, trying to get above the predator in their midst. He had seconds to process, to decide. His tactical brain, honed by training and combat reports, worked faster than conscious thought. Stay high. Altitude is life. He rolled into another attack. This time on a pair of Tonys, climbing laboriously towards him. They were bleeding energy in their climb, while he had it in abundance. One of the Tony pilots saw him and panicked, opening fire prematurely. Tracers from its 12.7 MOV machine guns asked harmlessly yards wide of Johnson's canopy. An amateur's mistake. Johnson held his fire, conserving ammunition, closing the distance. The Tony pilot realized his error and tried to break away. But it was too late. Johnson squeezed the trigger. A 3-second burst from the concentrated battery of weapons sawed the Tony's wing root apart. Metal peeled back, the wing folded, and the aircraft tumbled out of the sky. 2 down, 18 to go. He scanned the sky. Ammunition, plenty. Fuel, acceptable. Altitude, good. The enemy was disorganized, but they were veteran pilots. They would regroup. He had maybe 30 seconds before they coordinated a counter-attack. He got 5. A shadow crossed his canopy. A third fighter, another Tony, had used the distraction to position itself for a perfect deflection shot from 2 o'clock high. Both pilots saw each other in the same instant. Both reacted. Johnson yanked the yoke hard left and back, throwing the P38 into a violent, climbing turn. The Tony pilot rolled toward him. They were closing head, on at a combined speed of over 600 miles per hour. In 3 seconds, they would either collide or pass within feet of each other. Both pilots opened fire simultaneously. The sky between them became a hellstorm of streaking tracers and exploding shells. Johnson's heavier, concentrated firepower struck first. 50 caliber rounds and 20 NEM shells ripped into the Tony's engine and wing roots. The left wing began to disintegrate, tearing away under the onslaught. But the dying Tony pilot got his shots off too. A stream of 20 NEM shells walked across the P-38's right tail boom. One shell detonated against the engine nacelle. Another smashed into the tail section. A third struck the critical connection between the left tail boom and the vertical stabilizer. Then, the impossible. The mortally wounded Tony. Its pilot, already dead, cartwheeled directly into Johnson's left tail assembly. The impact was a sickening, jarring crunch of metal. The entire left vertical stabilizer and rudder tore away, spinning into the void. The left tail boom behind the engine twisted violently, held on now only by a few frayed control cables and a thin strip of mangled metal. Johnson felt his aircraft lurch, as if it had been kicked by a giant. The control yoke went mushy in his hands. The right rudder pedal slammed back against his foot. Every instinct, every fibre of his training, screamed at him to bail out. The aircraft was mortally wounded. At 18,000 feet with half its tail missing, it was a death trap. But the P-38 was still flying. Barely. The twin Allison engines, miraculously, were still running. The wings were intact. He could still feel life in the controls. He fought the yoke, his muscles straining. The aircraft wanted to roll right and yaw uncontrollably. He pushed left rudder, compensated with aileron, and nursed the throttles with a delicate touch. The damaged airframe shuddered and vibrated, a continuous, terrifying tremor that promised imminent structural failure, but it held together. Below, the remaining Japanese fighters were reforming. They had seen the collision. They assumed the American was finished. A few began to climb, eager to finish him off. But Johnson still had options. He still had speed. He still had 2 engines. He had American engineering built to withstand abuse. Carefully, he pushed both throttles forward. The right engine responded smoothly. The left, despite being on the shattered boom, still produced power. But the P-38's famous counter, rotating propellers, designed to cancel out torque, now worked against him. The asymmetric forces from the damaged tail wanted to roll him inverted. He worked the elevator and aileron trim wheels, fighting for every ounce of stability. It wasn't much, but it helped. The Lightning steadied slightly, flying in a barely controlled, descending stagger. He was losing altitude, 50 feet every second. The mathematics were grim. He was at 17,000 feet. Duro was 120 miles to the south. At this rate, he'd be down to 5,000 feet by the time he reached friendly territory, if he reached it at all. 3 Oscars below had finished their climb, and were turning to intercept his stumbling flight path. They knew he was wounded. They moved in for the kill. Johnson did the only thing he could. He pushed the nose over slightly, trading precious altitude for speed. The P-38, even in its crippled state, accelerated. 340 miles per hour. The damaged tail shook with a renewed violence, a grinding, screeching protest that told him something back, that was on the verge of total failure. The Oscars climbed hard, their pilots trying to cut him off, but Johnson's speed advantage held. The P-38, even crippled, was faster than an Oscar in level flight. He slowly pulled ahead, the distance opening. The Japanese pilots fired from long range, desperate shots that fell short and wide. After 30 seconds of futile pursuit, they broke off and turned away. He was alone again in the vast, empty sky, but the struggle was far from over. The control yoke required constant, brute force to keep the wings level. His left arm ached from holding the left aileron, his right leg cramped from the constant pressure on the left rudder. Sweat soaked his flight suit despite the cold at altitude. He checked his fuel. Both engines, running rich and straining against the drag of the wrecked tail, were gulping fuel. Maybe 40 minutes of flying time remained. Then, a voice, clear and calm, broke through the radio static. "Sooner, this is Hornet Leader. We see you at our 10 o'clock high. Looks like you took some damage. We're coming up to escort you home." Johnson looked left and saw 3 P-38s climbing gracefully from below. The 39th Fighter Squadron, returning from a different mission, had heard the radio chatter and diverted to help. Within minutes, they slotted into formation around him, one on each wing, one trailing behind to watch for any Japanese fighters still hungry for a fight. "Sooner, you're missing half your left tail." One of the escort pilots transmitted, his voice a mixture of awe and disbelief. "How the hell are you still flying?" "Twin engines." Johnson replied, his voice tight with the strain of holding the aircraft together. "And luck. You're gonna need a lot of it." The flight back to Duro was the longest 35 minutes of Gerald Johnson's life. Every second was a battle. The P-38 felt like it was on the verge of a flat spin. The drag from the mangled tail boom was immense, forcing him to keep both throttles advanced, just to maintain a flying speed that wouldn't stall the aircraft. The vibration was a constant. Terrifying companion, he could feel and hear structural members giving way, one by one, in the rear of the aircraft. At 8,000 feet, crossing the coastline, he made a decision. A normal landing was impossible. His approach speed would have to be much faster than usual, without full tail control. A slow approach would mean a stall and a fatal spin. He had to come in hot and use every inch of the long runway at Duro to bleed off speed. He keyed his radio. "Duro Tower, this is Sooner. I'm coming in with major structural damage. Clear the runway. I am not sure I can control this thing on the ground. Roger. Sooner. Runway is yours. Crash crew is standing by." He descended toward the base, his escorts staying with him until the last possible moment. At 2,000 feet, he lowered the landing gear. The hydraulic system, miraculously, still worked. 3 green lights illuminated. Gear down and locked. He reached for the flap lever. Nothing. The flap controls ran through the damaged tail section. They were either severed or jammed. No flaps meant an even higher landing speed, at least 150 miles per hour instead of the normal 110. On a hot day. With a mortally wounded aircraft, it was going to be terrifyingly close. He crossed the runway threshold at 160 miles per hour. The P-38 shaking so violently he could barely read the instruments. The moment the main wheels screeched onto the tarmac, he chopped both throttles to idle and stood on the brakes. The Lightning bounced once, hard, then settled. Thick black smoke poured from the screaming tires. Johnson fought the aircraft's tendency to swerve violently to the right, using differential braking and the faintest, most careful movements of the remaining controls. The end of the runway rushed toward him, 500 feet, 300, 100. The P-38 shuddered. Slowing 60 for WWII, it rolled to a complete stop with less than 50 feet of asphalt remaining. Silence. Broken only by the pinging of cooling metal and his own ragged breathing. He sat there, his hands still locked in a death grip on the control yoke, unable to process that he was alive, on the ground, in one piece. The ground crew sprinted toward the aircraft. When they reached the tail section, they stopped dead in their tracks, staring. The left vertical stabilizer was gone, completely sheared off. The left tail boom behind the engine was bent at a 15-degree angle, held to the rest of the aircraft by 2 frayed control cables and a strip of twisted metal no thicker than a man's thumb. By every known law of aerodynamics, the aircraft should have torn itself apart moments after the collision. Crew Chief Sergeant Thomas Ruiz climbed onto the wing and looked into the cockpit. Johnson was still staring straight ahead, his face pale, his knuckles white. "Sir, you okay?" Johnson turned his head slowly, the movement seeming to require immense effort. "Yeah, Sergeant, I'm okay." He unclipped his harness with trembling fingers and climbed out on shaky legs. He walked around the wing, his eyes taking in the full, horrifying extent of the damage for the first time. He saw the single, fragile strip of metal that had been the difference between life and death. He sat down heavily on the wing root, put his head in his hands, and started to laugh. A raw, relieved, almost hysterical sound of a man who had just stared into the abyss and, through a combination of skill, stubbornness, and pure dumb luck, had walked away. "What happened up there, Captain?" Ruiz asked, his voice full of reverence. Johnson looked up, his laughter subsiding into a weary smile. "I ran into 20 Japanese fighters, Sergeant. Shot down 2 of them. Then one of them decided to run into me. P-38 tail number 83, Sooner, was officially scrapped. The damage was too extensive to repair." But Gerald Johnson's action report triggered immediate attention from 5th Air Force headquarters. General George Kenney personally reviewed the gun camera footage and the testimony from the escort pilots. Johnson was credited with 2 confirmed kills, 1 Key 43 Oscar and 1 Key 61 Tony. He was promoted to Major and given command of the 9th Fighter Squadron 1 month later. But the real impact of that 17-minute engagement went far beyond 2 enemy aircraft destroyed. It became a case study, a legend whispered in ready rooms and taught in tactical briefings. It was the ultimate demonstration of what the P-38 Lightning, when flown by a skilled and aggressive pilot who understood its strengths, could do. The key was understanding what the P-38 could do that the Japanese fighters could not. Speed at altitude was paramount. Above 20,000 feet, the Lightning was untouchable. Its twin-turbo, supercharged Allison engines maintained full power in the thin air, where Japanese fighters gasped and became sluggish. A 0 at 25,000 feet was a liability. A P-38 at 25,000 feet was a god. Firepower was the second advantage. Johnson's 4.50 caliber machine guns and single 20mm cannon, all nose mounted, created a concentrated cone of destruction. Unlike wing mounted guns that required careful convergence at a specific range, the P-38's weapons pointed straight ahead. Where the pilot aimed, the bullets went. At 200 yards, that stream of fire was concentrated enough to saw a fighter in half. Durability was the third factor. The P-38 could absorb punishment that would doom any single-engine fighter. Johnson's survival with half his tail section missing was the most extreme proof. The twin-engine configuration meant redundancy. Lose one engine, you fly home on the other. Take catastrophic damage to one boom, and the other might just keep you airborne. But the most important advantage wasn't the aircraft itself. It was the pilot training and the evolving tactical doctrine. By mid-1943, American pilots had learned the hard, bloody lessons of energy fighting. The early disasters of 1942, when P-38 pilots tried to dogfight Zeros at low altitude and were slaughtered, had forced a revolution in thinking. The new doctrine was simple: never slow down, never get drawn into a turning fight. Use your speed and altitude to dictate the terms of every engagement. Dive in, shoot, zoom, climb back to safety. Repeat. The P-38 could outrun anything Japan had in level flight above 15,000 feet. It was a surgeon's scalpel, not a brawler's club. Japanese ace Saburo Sakai, who had over 60 kills to his name, would later write about the demoralizing effect of facing the lightning. The P-38 destroyed the morale of the Zero fighter pilot. He confessed. We could not catch them at altitude. We could not escape them in a dive. Fighting the P-38 was like fighting a ghost that could choose when and where to engage us. The production numbers told an even more devastating story. By the end of 1943, Lockheed was producing P-30As at a rate of over 400 aircraft per month. Total production would reach 10,037 by war's end. Japan's entire fighter production for 1943 was approximately 7,000 aircraft across all types, most of which were inferior to the P-38 in every performance metric except low-speed maneuverability. Gerald Johnson went on to become one of the Pacific's leading aces, credited with 22 confirmed aerial victories. He was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the Distinguished Flying Cross, the Silver Star, the Air Medal, and the Legion of Merit. When asked about the mission of July 26th, he would shrug it off with characteristic Midwestern modesty. I had a good airplane and I knew how to use it. That's all. But it wasn't all. It was the culmination of American industrial might producing a superior weapon in overwhelming numbers, a training system that produced thinking, adaptive pilots, and a tactical doctrine that ruthlessly exploited every advantage. Japan could not hope to match any of these factors. By mid-1943, the war in the Pacific Air was already decided. Men like Gerald Johnson were simply executing the inevitable conclusion. The Japanese pilots who survived the Markham Valley engagement filed official reports claiming they had been ambushed by an entire squadron of P-38s. Some estimated 10 to 15 enemy aircraft. The truth, that one American pilot, alone, had engaged them, shot down two, and escaped despite suffering what should have been a fatal wound, was a truth too demoralizing, too humiliating to accept. Gerald Johnson survived the war, returning to the United States a hero, though he was never comfortable with the label. But on October 7, 1945, just 2 months after Japan's surrender, he was killed while flying the new Lockheed P-80 Shooting Star, America's first operational jet fighter. He was 25 years old. The P-38 Lightning, he flew that day in July 1943, the one that brought him home with half a tail, lived on in photographs and engineering reports. Designers studied the damage patterns to learn more about the resilience of their creation. pilot studied his tactics, learning the art of the possible. And somewhere in Japan, a surviving pilot from that engagement, an old man now, perhaps told his grandchildren a story about the day his formation of 20 encountered an American demon in a twin-tailed fighter. A demon who attacked them alone, killed 2 of their best, and flew away from a certain death, laughing at the laws of physics and war. He probably never mentioned it was just one man. Some truths, after all, were too bitter to speak aloud.